Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 164 of Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at ShaneHaffNFL. I'm joined today by the best co-host in the game. You've heard him on the Tough Cover radio show. It is Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. Mark, I love that when I refer to you as the best co-host in the game, you started nodding your head.
Absolutely, of course.
You co-sign that?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to getting to these two divisions because the last couple days I have gotten a little wild and talked myself really into a team in one of these divisions. So I'm interested to see Shane's reaction to that. I gave him a little tease of it in the DMs, but we'll see.
Yeah, I also kind of feel like I'm going off the reservation a little bit today as we preview the NFC South and the NFC West. So we are streaming this podcast live. It's also going on to a new market, the Eagles Pin Pull Network. So if you are a longtime Chalk Talk listener, you guys know what to expect from us. However, you do need to go subscribe to the Eagles Pin Pull Network feed because once the regular season starts, this same show is going to go out, but it's just going to go there. So make sure you go like it, subscribe it, check out our other stuff on the feed. We're going to have 6 weekly shows, post-game, draft, Eagles stuff, Birds of the Round Table, my film review with Johnny. It's all going to be there in one place, so please go rate, review, share that with your friends. But we did the NFC East and the NFC North last week, previewing the upcoming season. We're going to do the West and the South today, and then over the next 2 weeks, we will get into the AFC. So let's start in the NFC South because I feel like nobody really cares about or respects the NFC South. And we're going to go in the order they finished last season. And so let's kick off with the NFC South champions. They were also won a wild card game over the Philadelphia Eagles last year, although we don't talk about that. Let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they emerge out of the tie last year in the South with a 9-8 record. They blow out the Eagles on wild card weekend 32-9 before losing in the divisional round to Detroit in what was a close game. It was 23-31. And so, they made some noise in the postseason. This offseason, they lost Shaquille Barrett, Carlton Davis, Nick Leverett, and Devin White. And then they added cornerback Bryce Hall. They added Sua Opeta. Unfortunately, he's since been injured, and he's going to miss the whole season, which you hate to see that in training camp. And that's not the only time we're going to say that in this episode.
No.
They also added Jordan Whitehead to pair with Antoine Winfield at safety. And then in the draft, they added Graham Barton and Jalen McMillan. A couple of picks that I think we both like. I especially like the Graham Barton pick. I was really high on him. And so I've got some big questions for all of these teams. I'll throw some of these out here to get us started. But my big question for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is running it back the right move? They can probably win the division again, but can they actually make a playoff run? It doesn't feel like it to me. It feels like they're going to be right back in the same spot next offseason where they were too good, courtesy of a bad division, to be in top quarterback range, but they're not actually good enough to be taken seriously as a contender for anything besides their own division. And so that's my first big question for them, Mark, and I'll throw it over here to you. But is running it back the right approach for the Buccaneers?
It's hard to say no. I don't think so, and you'll hear why. I would say no in a second, but it's hard to tell a team that went to the second round and took the Lions, had a close game with the Lions. I'm pretty sure if I'm remembering that correctly, that they should completely blow it up. But paying Baker what they paid him, a little risky. A lot of aging guys on both sides of the ball on this team. But yeah, I don't know which guys they kept that they maybe shouldn't have, I guess. But it's definitely a risky team that I think is kind of teetering on falling apart. And I think Todd Bowles kept that defense, humming last year. And I don't really believe in that repeating into this season. And honestly, I think this is very clearly the third best roster in this division. And I think Shane is probably a little bit lower on this division than I am, taking Carolina out of it and looking at the other two teams. I think Shane's probably lower on both of them. I think there's one team in this division that's head and shoulders above the other teams from a roster perspective that I'm buying in on. And I think Tampa's one of these three teams that just didn't improve. Even if you want to look at Carolina, I think Carolina's improved a lot. If you look at what they've done in the draft and what they did in free agency, they at least went out and spent a lot of money and brought in a lot of professional football players who weren't there before. At least they have a professional receiving core. They've done a little bit on the offensive line. They've done some stuff that at least improve. So I just think Tampa is kind of on the treadmill, while as all the other teams have gotten better. They've made additions. They've made nice draft picks. Where I wasn't as high on the draft. Like Jalen McMillan and Graham Barton were both guys I was probably lower on than consensus. And Barton, where he went, I probably had some O-linemen that I would have taken, or maybe a different position that I would have taken for Tampa. My question with Tampa is, like, what position group for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are you like, they're definitely top 7 in?
I don't think there is one.
That's a problem.
I mean, maybe safety, because I'm really high on Antoine Winfield, but
let's make it secondary though.
Yeah, no, definitely not, because they lose Carlton Davis, who I think was a big part of that secondary. So if you look just at safety, I don't know how Jordan Whitehead comes in and plays, but I'm really high on Antoine Winfield. I think he's a top 5 safety in the league.
He might be top 1, honestly.
Nah, that's Kyle Hamilton, but
that's fair. I don't even know why I just said that. You're absolutely right. I don't even think of Kyle Hamilton as like a safety sometimes. He's just he's Wolverine. He's an X-Man. But he's definitely one. Winfield did grade out as the number 1 last year on safety, but I think he's probably second. Winfield had an insane year last year. That's another thing. How repeatable is that in terms of the playmaking standpoint of what they had and the takeaways that they were able to get on defense? Probably not very repeatable. The one thing I will say, if you're gonna argue for like a place that they could grow, they do have a lot of youth on the D line. Like Kalijah Cansey's really young, Logan Hall's really young, Yaya Diaby's really young. So they at least have a lot of guys who could grow in up front. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's like a top-notch unit, though, even with Vita Vea. So it's just they're average at a lot. And I think that there's probably people out there who would listen and say, like, oh, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I like Mike Evans more than anybody. I have a best friend who, for the last decade, has argued Mike Evans is overrated, still feels he's overrated. So I have to argue for Mike Evans constantly. I think he's a first-ballot Hall of Famer, still a top 15 receiver in the NFL. But realistically, both those guys are on the wrong side of the age that you want to be at receiver in the NFL. What are the odds that one of those guys doesn't regress this year? It feels like we're going to get to a regression for both of those guys in the next couple of years. So it'd be hard for me to believe that we don't get it from one of them this year. And I feel like we've already kind of seen it a little bit from Godwin. So I just the weapons in this offense don't get you excited.
It better not be from Mike Evans, because what I need from Mike Evans is another 1,000-yard season, because right now he has 10 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, which is one behind Jerry Rice's record, 11. And that's one of the other things I just want to watch with this team this year. If he can notch the 1,000-yard season again to tie Rice's streak, he would also be 3 years younger than Jerry Rice was when he set the record. And so assuming no injury, assuming, QB competency and stability, Mike Evans could put that record out of reach for a long time. And so that's just something cool to watch throughout the year, because that could very much be history in the making in Tampa Bay this season.
Something that's interesting, like Rachaad White, a guy who had a really good fantasy season for running backs last year. I don't have his exact stats right in front of me. But really, I mean, like he played every game, probably had over 1,200 yards if I had to guess. But in PFF terms, he graded out 41 out of 59 on running backs. He wasn't very efficient in terms of his touches. He just got a lot of opportunities and got a lot of touches in the receiving game and running the ball. But I don't know if he's repeating a season like he had last year, and will probably be even less efficient going forward. So Baker, we've seen Baker be up and down his entire career. So I think you could easily see Baker not be able to repeat last season. So just a lot of things that I think are going to be hard to repeat. I have them at 6-11. So I have Tampa really falling off a cliff here. And I think it's just, there's going to have to be bad teams in the NFC. And you look around, I think they're probably like the 3rd or 4th worst team in the NFC. And I know people are going to think that's crazy. They won the division. They beat the Eagles. They beat the crap out of the Eagles in the playoffs last year. They made it to the second round. I don't buy into this version of this team.
Yeah, they have the 11th easiest schedule. Their over-under is at 8.5, so Mark has the under. I have the over slightly, but I have them missing the playoffs. This is not my playoff pick from the division. So let's keep rolling here. We'll go to...
They did also lose their offensive coordinator, by the way. I
yes,
forgot to
they
mention
lost
that.
Dave Canales to Carolina, replaced with Liam Cohen.
And
I had a bullet point on that, and then I was like, we've talked for far too long on the Buccaneers.
We have, but I will say, Dave Canales, when he left Seattle, Geno and that offense changed. It didn't look quite the same. I think we could see the same here.
Don't steal my talking point for the Panthers later.
There you go.
All right, let's keep rolling here to the New Orleans Saints, who also went 9-8 last offseason. They lost. Their losses this offseason include Zach Bond, Malcolm Roach, Michael Thomas, Jameis Winston, and Isaac Yiadom. I never know if I'm saying his last name right, but he's a Madden legend for me. Like
really?
6 years ago, I had him in a Madden league and turned him into a star. Anyways, they added Willie Gay, Chase Young, and then in the draft, I thought they had a good draft. Talisi Fuaga, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Spencer Rattler. So a couple questions I've got for them. One is, how long can Mickey Loomis keep kicking this can down the road with contracts, only to keep losing the easiest division in football? Like, rather than deconstructing the roster this offseason and taking their lumps, they did it again, and they're currently $98 million over the cap for next offseason. And my question is, for what? I mean, they've pushed the chips in. They've continued to make this future problem worse to finish second, third, and second in the division over the last 3 years. So that's one question for me. The other one is...
Real quick, I'm just going to interrupt because I know Shane's not an NBA guy, but before we move off the Mickey Loomis point, he also owns the Pelicans in the NBA. And the Pelicans, well, you guys beat them in the Thunder beat the Pelicans in the playoffs this year, I think. I think that was their first round team that they played. I can't even
remember now.
I think they might have swept them or beat them in 5. It was an easy first round series. And after the season, their GM came out and said, next year, our team will be different. Like, we've had this team for like 3-4 years. It's the same result. We're the 7th seed. We need to do something to do something different. And everyone took that as, oh, they're going to trade Brandon Ingram. They're going to trade CJ McCollum. They're going to kind of rebuild a little bit around Zion, and they're going to get younger. Nope. They went out and traded future picks for a point guard who is like a middle-of-the-road point guard. I kind of like him, good defensive player, but like they went in on the team instead of being like, let's sell it and like get a rebuilding. It's so funny, and it's Mickey Loomis.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did look it up. That was who they swept in the first round. I couldn't remember, but yeah. So yeah, it's a thing here with Mickey Loomis. My other question for them is, will Spencer Rattler put pressure on Derek Carr if the season gets off to a rough start? I like Spencer Rattler's arm talent. He does some boneheaded things at times, but half of last season was Derek Carr getting in fights with his receivers, and that's a terrible contract. And of course, Mickey Loomis never saw a terrible contract he didn't like, but they're going to have Clint Kubiak coming over, the passing game coordinator from San Francisco. He's going to take over as the OC, so maybe he can revitalize that. But I'm interested to see how quarterback is handled. This is not a team that I have a lot of faith in to do anything different than normal. They've got the 5th easiest schedule. Their over-under is set at 7.5. I've got them going over but missing the playoffs, just like the last couple years.
Yeah, I initially had them as my 9-8, 7 seed in the playoffs, and I've talked myself out of switching one result, which we'll get to in the NFC West. But I now have them at 8-9, so I'm still going over that 7.5 number. I think they're the same team as last year, besides a couple nice moves. They did make a couple nice moves. I like Kool-Aid. I think he's a guy who could play right away. Fuaga is a guy who can play right away. And Chase Young's a nice like upside swing to take on like a 1-year contract. Willie Gay was a nice addition at linebacker. So I do like a lot of what they did on defense. And Dennis Allen, not a good head coach, has had a pretty steady, at least average defense in New Orleans. Some years better than average, and I think they'll probably be a better than average defense again this year. It comes down to the offense. You still have Kamara. You still have Olave. I think Derek Carr's below average, but I don't think he's going to – the train will be kept on the tracks. So I think they're very much one of the shorter kind of windows, like 8 or 9 wins. I can't really see them winning 7 or less, and I can't really see them winning 11 or more. So very kind of – that's what they are.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's keep the ball rolling to the Atlanta Falcons, which is a team I thought you would yell at me for my takes, but judging based off what you said so far, I think we're both going to pick this team to win the division. But they went 7-10 last year, and then this offseason, I think their biggest loss this offseason was when they lost their ever-loving minds, paying Kirk Cousins $100 million in guaranteed money, and then drafting Michael Penix Jr. at number 8 overall 46 days later. A guy who played with a trio of top 100 receivers and a duo of top 100 offensive tackles. And they drafted him. And I'm still not over it, but this isn't a draft show. So I won't keep relitigating it all. But they also lost Bud Dupree, Matt Hennessy, Van Jefferson, Jeffrey Okudah, Cordero Patterson, and Jonnu Smith. This offseason, they added Kirk Cousins, we already mentioned, cornerback Antonio Hamilton, Ray McLeod, Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore, and then in the draft, they added the aforementioned Michael Penix Jr. They also added Rook Ororhoro and Braylon Trice. My big question for them is, will Kirk Cousins be enough to push this team to a division title? I mean, they won 7 games last year, and they had some of the worst quarterback play in the entire league. The weapons are there because they've spent top 5 picks on weapon after weapon after weapon. Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. Can Raheem Morris come in and put it all together for them? And can they go win? They have the easiest schedule in the NFL. Their over-under is at 9.5. And I'm smashing that over, and I think the Atlanta Falcons win this division. And I thought you would sit back and make a shocked face when I said that, but I'm guessing based on your takes on the other two teams, we're in agreement here.
Yeah, I have the Falcons at 12-5, kind of running away with this division, and this is a shocking statement. I have them in the NFC Championship game. I think that they're a team that can be a Super Bowl contender. And I know that sounds crazy, but here's the one thing. And so I probably will have some bets on the Falcons to win either the NFC or the Super Bowl, whatever the case may be. The one argument I'll have against that, and the schedule's really easy, maybe you wait until after week 3 to place your Falcons futures, because Steelers at home, regardless, I don't know what you think about the Steelers. I think they're a playoff team. They kind of consistently are and have definitely improved the quarterback position, even if we don't like Russ. They had Kenny Pickett playing there last year with Mason Rudolph.
Russ isn't going to be their quarterback, but carry on.
I hope you're right. And if that's the case, then we're really talking about a contender, I actually do believe. But week 2, you're going to Philly on a night game. Week 3, you're hosting Patrick Mahomes. After that 3 weeks, it is Saints, Bucks, Panthers, Seahawks, Bucks, Cowboys at home, Saints, Broncos, Chargers, Vikings, Raiders, Giants, Commanders, Panthers. It is an insane run. Like, the Falcons are the team to me. I think they'll be like 1-3, maybe like 0-3, maybe 0-2, whatever the case may be. And I think they might rip off like 10 straight wins at some point at that, last back 14 games of the schedule. I think they get really hot, and you just go through the roster, and it is like very clear to me that they should have taken Rome Odunze. It's so crystal clear, because if they had taken Rome Odunze, I would like really be putting a lot of units, I'll say, on the Falcons to really make a deep run. But I think you feel good about quarterback no matter what. Kirk Cousins, I think, is a fringe top 10 quarterback. And if he gets hurt or he gets old, whether or not we agreed with the decision, it was a terrible decision. But Michael Penix is at least going to step in and I think be ready to play. I mean, he's an older player. I think he's probably – how many backups do you think do you feel better about coming in than Michael Penix, Shane?
Not
many.
Not many. I mean, if Justin Fields is the backup and –
yes.
I would take him.
The Steelers' backup is.
I'd probably still say Russ if he's the backup, but maybe not. May probably feel better about Pickett as a backup just because he's done it for a couple years.
I wouldn't.
I would probably feel better about Jacoby Brissett as a backup.
He's the starter, so it's like.
Oh, is he the starter?
I think he's going to start, yeah.
Okay, so then I feel better about May.
Yeah, it's a weird one. The rookies are always tough to kind of include in these. But, yeah, just in terms of, like, non-rookie situations, like just straight-up backup, I think he's one. I guess Penix is a rookie, so it's hard It's hard to say
Yeah.
that. But then you look at the rest of the roster. Bijan Robinson's the number 2 running back going off the board in fantasy drafts this year. I didn't realize how good of a year he had last year. Like if you actually look at it just statistically, he was really involved in their passing game in a way that I don't know if I expected him to be in his first year. He only rushed for 4.6 yards per carry and was under 1,000 yards. Most of that was due to usage, I think. But he did get 58 catches, had 4 receiving touchdowns. The yards per reception was really low. But I think that we see him balloon up to like 70 plus catches this year. I think he's going to be really involved. I think I am buying all of the Kyle Pitts revenge tour hype. I don't know how many years in a row I can do this, but I'm finally going to do it with Kirk Cousins at the helm. I'm buying in. Drake London, a lot of those nerds out there on Twitter that look at, separation metrics and some stuff like that think that he is going to be an absolute beast this year. I think he's got a chance to really, really level up. Then you look at the offensive line, like their center graded out as a top 3 center last year. Chris Lindstrom was the best guard in football last year. They had 2 tackles in Caleb McGarry and Jake Matthews who graded well above league average last year at tackle. And you have another guard who graded out above league average. So it's just you feel really good about where they're at up front. I actually feel pretty good. You have AJ Terrell in the secondary with a lot of other names. Jesse Bates, one of the best safeties in the league. Linebackers, probably Caden Ellis was pretty good last year as a young player, but linebackers probably iffy. But then up front, you've got a lot of guys like Onyemata and Jarrett in the middle are really good. And you've got a lot of options on the edge, maybe no number 1 guy, but
I'm not sold on the defense. You mentioned Roma Dunze. I would have loved to have seen a pass rusher at number 8. I don't think I could have passed on a Dunze, but in an ideal world, they could use pass rusher. And
a problem with that, I'm lower on Mooney than most. Like Darnell Mooney, I know a lot of people out there really like him. And I think they gave him like more money than I would have anticipated. I can't remember what that contract was, but I remember seeing it and being like, "Oh, people like Darnell Mooney." I guess I've never been a fan. Maybe that was a situational thing. Maybe he's better than I think, and maybe he steps into a wide receiver 2 role.
He got 3 years, $39 million with $26 million of it guaranteed.
That's a lot of money. Like that means they think Darnell Mooney is like a legit wide receiver too. I don't know if I believe that at all. So that's kind of where I come at. I think the defense will be fine. I think because of the interior D-line being so good and because I'm buying in so big on the secondary, it takes a little bit of the pressure off the linebackers and the ends there. And I think Raheem Morris, the defensive coordinator, he should be able to cook something up, whether that be scheme-wise or developing some of those younger guys. So I'm buying in. I'm in on the Falcons as like a legit Super Bowl contender.
All right. Well, let's go to a couple comments and we'll move on. Mike on YouTube says Kirk will thrive in the Bible Belt. And our good friend Joe Ciccoletti says that the biggest concern for the Falcons is edge and CB2. Wow. The offense has a chance to be a top 5 unit, but the defense could be a bottom 5
I don't
unit.
agree with that. The defense was mid last year. Like they weren't a bottom unit last year, and they didn't really lose anything. Like if anything, they've added some pieces to it. So I think the defense will be mid. Like I think the defense will be mid with the potential of Raheem Morris. If Raheem Morris is a good coaching hire, I'm not convinced on it. I'm a little bit nervous about that. It's probably my number 1 thing holding me back from being all in on the Falcons. But if he's a good coaching hire, that means he'll at least be a good defensive coordinator for them. And I think that means the floor is mid with the potential of being like a better defense than the sum of its parts. Like we saw with Minnesota last year. Brian Flores made that team like a top half of the league defense with bottom 5 talent. And that's just because he's a good enough coordinator and created chaos. If Morris is able to do the same thing. I mean, the Rams, we talked going into last year, that we thought the Rams defense was Aaron Donald and a bunch of no names. Raheem Morris got a lot out of some of those young guys. Maybe we see that again here.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep rolling on to the final team in this division. It is the Carolina Panthers, who went 2-15 last season. A season to forget if you're a Panthers fan, and I know one. But this offseason, they lost Von Bell, Bradley Bozeman, Brian Burns via that trade with the Giants, Dante Jackson, and Frankie Louvu, who signed with the Washington Commanders. They went out and added Jadeveon Clowney, Robert Hunt, who they made one of the highest paid guards in the NFL, Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jonathan Brooks, and Trevin Wallace through the draft. Big questions for the Panthers. this is the only question for the Panthers. Will the weapons that the Panthers invested into around Bryce Young be enough to make him look like an NFL player? Because he certainly did not last year. And there was a lot working against him. He was a rookie. His coach got fired halfway through the season. His best receiver was Adam Thielen. Like, there was a lot going wrong, but it's also hard to look at CJ Stroud and the situation he stepped into and the difference there. So they get Dave Canales. Can he get the most out of Bryce Young? I mean, you mentioned it earlier. You stole my thunder a bit, but he was Geno's QB coach in 2022 when he broke out, and he left before the 2023 season, and Geno regressed some in 2023. And he went to Tampa, and he helped kind of get Baker Mayfield back on track. So the only thing that matters for Panthers fans this year is, can you enter a year 3 with Bryce Young? Because if year 2 goes like year 1, you're drafting a quarterback next year, and you probably have the number 1 pick. So can Bryce Young do enough this year to save his job? That's what this whole season is about for the Panthers. They have the 10th easiest strength of schedule. Their over-under is set at 4.5, and I'm just not convinced, Mark. I've got the under on 4.5 wins for the Panthers.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I want to be higher on them. I want to tell you that I think Bryce Young's situation ruined him. Or I just kind of buried the lead. I think the situation might have ruined him. Like, if he was retrievable or kind of fixable, I think that might have completely broken and shattered confidence. And I don't know if you come back from that. And I think that maybe if he landed in a different situation, we're talking about him differently. But I think I probably under considered. That's not a word. But the obvious concerns that were there, I overlooked them because I was so in on certain aspects of his game, and just I think he's too small, and it's a shame to say that. I think he's the last guy we'll see at that size get taken seriously in the NFL, and it's a shame. I hope I'm wrong, because I was really in on Bryce Young, and I was really impressed on his poise in the pocket and certain things he was able to do coming out of college. It seems like none of it was there at all last year, regardless of the situation. I didn't see an ounce of poise when I thought that was his number 1 trait coming out of college. Like, everyone compared him to like Steph Curry. He was like a point guard, like very much just distributing the ball. I don't know. I get I love Xavier Legette. I love Deontay Johnson. I don't really like Jonathan Brooks that much, but at least they went out and got a young running back to add to the room. They went out and signed Robert Hunt. They've done probably what you should do. They hired Robert or Dave Canales. I don't know.
Yeah. Like I said, this whole season's just about seeing what you can get. You're not going to go win your division, more than likely. I mean, crazy things happen, but you're not going to go win your division. You want to prove to yourself that you weren't totally wrong at quarterback 2 years ago in the draft, and feel like you can continue to build around him going into year 3. And I think that should be the goal for Panthers fans.
Here's one thing I will say about the Panthers. And I know a lot of people out there are going to, they'll always get made fun of for the trade that they made for Bryce Young. They have their first round pick this year, correct? Like, they only gave up the 2 1s, and that was part of the reason they gave up DJ Moore.
Yes, I think they gave up a second in this upcoming draft, but I'm not positive. I'll look it up while you talk.
So that gives them the ability, if Bryce Young isn't, I think he probably isn't the guy, that gives them the ability to go out there and probably draft his replacement high in the draft next year without having to give up assets to move up again. So everyone's going to make fun of that trade. I think if Bryce Young worked out, that would have been a great trade. And even with him not working out, at least you didn't hamstring yourself too much for the future. Instead, you just didn't have to give DJ Moore a massive contract on a bad team. So I get it. People are always going to make fun of it, but I do think at least they gave themselves an out here instead of giving up 3 straight ones.
Yeah, they do have their first. They do not have their second, but they do have the Rams' second-round pick. So,
okay.
So they have a full complement of picks, their own third, their own fourth. They've got 3 fifth-rounders, a 6th-rounder, and a 7th-rounder. So they're fine on draft capital. They should be able to hopefully build around Bryce Young for another season. If it goes south again, if it's like last year, they should also have the ability to move on.
Joe Chick commented, my guy, he said, man, Mark, don't sound so defeated. They're a young team that aren't great. It is what it is. My thing is just Bryce Young. I was so wrong on Bryce Young. It's maybe my worst draft evaluation of all time. I know it's early to say that, but I was just very much in on Bryce Young as the QB1 of that draft. And I loved Stroud too, but I was all in on Bryce Young, thought he was going to be a superstar. And I maybe it's way early to kind of totally adjust what you were seeing. I just think once you saw him in NFL, on an NFL field against NFL athletes, I'm not one of those guys who's afraid to admit when they're wrong. But it upsets me when you spend so much time evaluating the draft and you get something so wrong. And you could argue situational, but regardless of that, I think I was so wrong that you have to reevaluate the way that you kind of evaluate a certain position. I think I did that this year, and maybe that's wrong to do. Maybe that's an overcorrection. But I think that when I was looking at quarterbacks this year, I'd be lying if I said that some of the mistakes that I've made with Bryce Young and other QB scouting in the past don't play a factor. Is that fair, Shane?
Yeah. I mean, I think you learn stuff about – it's interesting when you get into scouting stuff because you learn things from misses on evaluations, but also there's an element that we like to think at times of ourselves too highly as evaluators, and we don't give proper weight to the situation people land in. Like, if Bryce Young lands in a different situation, maybe he is better. If CJ Stroud lands in a different situation, maybe he's not as good. Like, you never know on stuff like that, especially for quarterbacks more than any other position. And it's why they're so hard to evaluate. The NFL, they get paid to do it, and their hit rate on quarterbacks is tremendously low. So
lowest hit rate of the major positions in the first 3 rounds.
Yep, absolutely. So, all right, let's close the door on the depressing conversation about the Panthers here, and let's spring over to the NFC West. And so we'll start off with the San Francisco 49ers, who won that division last year with a 12-5 record. They beat the Packers in the divisional round of the playoffs 21-24. They beat the Lions in the NFC title game 34-31. And then they fell to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl in overtime 25-22. All 3 games decided by 3 points. Then this offseason, they lose Eric Armstead, Oren Burks, Cleveland Farrell, Javon Kinlaw, Ray McLeod, and Chase Young. They went out and they got Devondre Campbell, John Feliciano, Jordan Elliott, Yetur Gross-Matos, Leonard Floyd. In the draft, they added Ricky Pearsall, Renardo Green, and Dominique Pooney. My biggest question, I have 2 big questions for them. The first is what's going to happen with Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams. Trent Williams is holding out right now over contract issues. Brandon Ayuk is having a hold in, so he's at the facility, but he's attending meetings but not practicing. Ayuk is on his 5th-year option. And so even if Ayuk decides to play on the 5th-year option, which I absolutely would not do if I was him, even if he decides to do that, you still have this massive contract question mark looming, as you also have a potential Brock Purdy extension looming down the road as well. And so there's a lot of moving parts there. There were reports he asked for a trade earlier this offseason. I think those reports have since been disputed, if not refuted, so nobody really knows what's going on there. And then in the middle of all that, I also question, can Christian McCaffrey continue to hold up under his high usage? He led the league with 339 touches last season. And I mean, we just watched a season ago Josh Jacobs come off of tremendously high touches and fall apart. And we've seen that time and time again in the NFL, these guys that get so many touches, they have a letdown season. And, there's exceptions. Derrick Henry's had tremendously high workloads for a long time, and Christian McCaffrey's had a lot of touches. Is this the year that it finally catches up? So questions on the offense there. Mark, what are your thoughts about the 49ers heading into this season?
I don't want to belabor it too much because I talked about it when we talked about Dallas, but all of the looming concern that I think there is nationally about an Eagles collapse again this season, and a lot of locker room turmoil and the drama that people want to attach to the Eagles, I think you have to look squarely at Dallas and San Fran. And I've said pretty consistently, I guarantee one of Dallas or San Fran has the season from hell. And I think one of them has the season that maybe knocks them out of the playoffs. I would put my money on Dallas before San Fran when it comes to that. But I have San Fran winning this division, but doing so only by winning 10 or 11 games. I had them at 10-7. So I had them kind of falling back in terms of their regular season success, but still winning a tough division. I think they lost a lot up front. And I think the biggest thing is we've seen every time you remove one of the key cogs of that offense, it looks so much different. I think it's just you need Purdy at QB, you need McCaffrey at running back, you need Debo and Ayuk, you need Kittle right here, and you need Trent Williams. You take away one of those pieces, and I think it all falls apart. I think they all play together to take attention away from each other. And I think you take Ayuk out of that, they can kind of focus on Debo and take away what he does, and then you don't really have a deep threat at that point. If you take Trent Williams out of that, you've got serious problems because he might be the most important player on the team. So there's just so many of these guys, and they stayed remarkably healthy last season. They've stayed remarkably healthy pretty consistently for some of those guys who have had some injury concerns. But I just find it hard to believe that all those guys are going to stay healthy again. And that's when you the 49ers you look at the cap situation that they're in with Williams and Ayuk. They've kind of employed this stars and scrubs attitude where they go out and they pay big money and for these guys. And Purdy's a different situation, but the other guys, they go stars and scrubs. They don't have a super deep roster, I'd say, at really many positions at all. Maybe secondary you could point to and say they have some depth there. I wouldn't say it anywhere else, really. I mean, up front, not at edge or D tackle, maybe a little bit at linebacker. They've got 3 pretty good linebackers. I think they're all going to play, though. Not a lot of depth on this team. I think they're really kind of banking on a lot of players to stay healthy to be the elite team that they were.
Yeah, not to mention coming off of the disappointments they have over the last couple of years. The injuries 2 years ago in the playoffs, and they get knocked out. Not just a Super Bowl loss, but an overtime Super Bowl loss last season. Now, they have the 18th easiest strength of schedule, so slightly more difficult than average. Their over-under is at 11.5, and I'm taking the under here. Now, notably, I took the under last year on the 49ers, and I thought that was the year that it would kind of fall apart, and it didn't. And so I'm not going that far this year. I still think they win their division, but like you, I think they do it at as a 10-win team. I don't think they're maybe as much of the unstoppable force that they were last season. I could see some problems, especially if they don't get the contract things figured out with Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk. So it's always scary when you've got not 1 but 2 star players holding out at the same time, and that's the world the 49ers are living in right now. So it makes me a little scared for them.
I've got the Niners as my 4 seed, going through it and picking all the games on the playoff predictor website. And the first round matchup would be a rematch of last year's NFC Conference Championship. They'd play the Lions, who I have at 11-6 as the top wild card. So that'd be a fun rematch in the first round of the playoffs.
That would be. All right, let's keep rolling here. Let's go to the Los Angeles Rams, who were surprising last year, going 10-7. They made it into the playoffs, and they fell to the Lions on Wild Card Weekend, 23-24. Now they lose Aaron Donald to retirement this offseason. They also lost Jordan Fuller and Coleman Shelton. They went out and they signed Jonah Jackson, left tackle from the Bengals. They got my guy, Cam Curl, safety out of Washington. They brought in Tre'Davious White. They made their first-round pick since 2016 when they selected Jared Verse in the draft. And then they also drafted Braden Fisk, Blake Corum, and Cameron Kinchins. 2 questions for the Rams. Number 1 is, how will the defensive line fare without Aaron Donald? I mean, Kobe Turner was impressive last year, but there is a lot to be said for playing next to Aaron Donald. And so how is he going to do this year when all the attention's not going on Donald every snap? That'll be interesting to see. Can he continue to put up the same metrics he did last year where he was quite good? And then on offense, can the Rams run it back? I mean, there is no denying that Matthew Stafford was on a heater last year, and he looked like he was back in his mid-20s. But still, I have concerns, like with the back, with the elbow. Like, I had those concerns last year, and it was a great year, but it's like, man, he's a year older. Is this the year that it falls apart? Kyron Williams followed up his rookie season where he had 139 rushing yards with 1,144 yards that ranked 3rd in the NFL. Puka Nacua came out of nowhere as a 5th-round pick and was 4th in the NFL in receiving yards. So can this offense do it again? It's like everybody had career years last year, except Stafford. But
Cup.
Yeah, Cup fell off a little bit, but Cup missed some games.
He was great per game, but he didn't miss a lot of time.
He played, I think it was 12 games and had like 800 yards. So he's a year older. Can the offense play that well again? That's a big question for me. What are your thoughts on the Rams, who have the 17th easiest schedule this season?
I think that my concerns don't come on the offensive side of the ball. They just all come on defense. I think there's a lot of questions about that secondary. Darius Williams is the only guy who graded out as an above-average player at his position last year. Even Cam Curl was below average at his position technically, even though this is a Cam Curl podcast. But Ernest Jones was good as a rookie last year at linebacker. I don't know how legit that is. Again, that's, not only are you helped by Aaron Donald at D tackle if you're an edge rusher, but you're helped if you're tackling behind him at linebacker, as we saw with Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis back at college. So I think that there's a lot to point to with a lot of guys who are going to be worse without Aaron Donald, and Ernest Jones is one of them. Kobe Turner is one of them. Bobby Brown was someone who graded out well as a defensive tackle last year next to Donald. I don't see that happening again. Byron Young was fine last year. I don't know if he's an NFL player. I just think that there's a chance, and Jared Verse, a rookie, obviously. I just think this defense is going to be one of the very worst in football, potentially bottom 2, bottom 3 in football. And a lot of these concerns are concerns I had last year when Aaron Donald was on the team, and then they really made me look dumb by making the playoffs, because I thought they were going to be really bad last season. But like you said, Stafford was on a heater, and while I said none of my concerns come on the offensive side of the ball, I'd be lying if I wasn't concerned about 37-year-old Matthew Stafford's back and shoulder and whatever it is that's bothering him at this time. So, I think there's safer bets to make than a team that has maybe the worst defense in football talent-wise with a quarterback who's 37 years old. There's a lot. I've got a Kyron Williams Rams t-shirt. He's my favorite Notre Dame player of the last decade. I think he's a stud, and I think he's going to continue being a stud. I think Cooper Kupp actually has a little bit of a revitalization this year if Stafford stays healthy. Maybe Puka falls back a little bit. But I think that the offense isn't a concern outside of Stafford's health, but the defense is extremely concerning.
Yeah.
And they also lost Raheem Morris. I forgot to mention that.
Yes. Yeah. So their over-under is at 8.5. Which side are you taking on that?
I'm going under. I'm actually surprised it's at 8.5, because when you listen to people talk about NFC playoff teams on any podcast or radio show, people are like, oh, well, the Rams, of course. They just throw them in as they'll be there because they were there last year and they went 10-7. They have Matthew Stafford. I have them at 7-10. I don't have them in the playoffs, but I'm actually surprised that number's not 9.5, and I think that number's telling you something. That's not something I like to say very often, but I think that number's telling you something.
Yeah, I also have them under on the 8.5. If it was 9.5, I would smash that under. But I have them under. I think it's a bit of a step back because I'm not sure the offense can be as good. I hope so. Stafford was fun to watch last year. He was in his bag, and I hope he does that again. I have concerns about the defense, even if the offense is as good, though. So let's go on to the Seattle Seahawks, who went 9-8 last year. This offseason, they lost Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush, and Bobby Wagner, so a trio of linebackers. But they went out and they signed Jerome Baker, linebacker out of Miami. They got Terrell Dotson, George Fant, Nick Harris, Jonathan Hankins, Byron Murphy in the draft, and Christian Haynes in the draft. So my question for the Seahawks this year was moving on from Pete Carroll a mistake? I don't think so. He appears to have lost his touch at 72 years old. The defense was bad last year, and they've invested a lot into the defense. They missed the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years, but the Seahawks were always in the hunt under Carroll, and there's something to be said for coaching stability.
Yeah.
And so you go out and you get Mike Macdonald, who doesn't have much experience, and definitely not as a head coach. And I love Mike Macdonald. He was phenomenal as a defensive coordinator in Baltimore last year. But he's young, so he's a gamble. It's a young staff all around. Low-key, one of my favorite moves is that they have Leslie Frazier in the building as an assistant head coach. Not that he was a good head coach ever, but he's been around the league for 20-odd years. And so he's like the one guy on the staff that has been around with a lot of experience to kind of help with all the behind-the-scenes general, how do we run training camp sort of things. So I like that he's in the building. I don't know. I think they made the right move moving on from Carroll, but the question is, did they make the right move by hiring Mike Macdonald? I think that's the bigger question.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have fired Pete Carroll. I get it though. They haven't finished top half in defense in like 5 years, and he's a defensive guy, so I get why they fired him. I do think he did an incredible job the year before he got fired, so it's hard for me to just say he totally lost it because they were so surprising in that first Geno Smith year. And I think what he did with that team, I think that team always fought for Pete Carroll. But having said that, it could be the same way with Mike Macdonald. We have no idea, what he'll be as a head coach. What I will say is there's a lot more like comparing this team and this roster to teams like Tampa or the Rams or Dallas even. I think there's more reasons to buy into the upside with Seattle than there is with those teams. Because obviously Geno, we've seen him be at least a league average quarterback. DK Metcalf, we know what he is. Jackson Smith and Jigba didn't get to fully show what I think he is last year, and maybe will be able to this year. Lockett's still really solid. Kenneth Walker's still pretty solid. I actually think Kenneth Walker's really overrated from like a real life standpoint. The fantasy heads know he's not a high fantasy pick. So he doesn't catch a lot of passes or anything. I think Kenneth Walker's gotten a little overrated by some, but he's still a solid running back, and Charbonnet's a good backup as well. The O-line, solid, but not spectacular, I'd say. But the defense, here's what I'll say. If Mike Macdonald was a good hire, this team will have a top 5 defense this year, because you look at the talent that's across the board on this defense. You've got Devin Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen out wide, Michael Jackson in the slot, who graded as a top 20 corner last year. Michael Jackson, the other two guys. Woolen had a rough year, still graded as like a better than average corner across the league. Witherspoon, one of the best in football. Julian Love, a really solid safety. Tyrell Dodson graded out as the best linebacker in football last year, according to PFF. You just drafted Byron Murphy, who I'm lower on than consensus, but no doubt an athletic freak that you plug in there to the middle of your defensive line. Leonard Williams, you gave up assets for last year. I can argue about whether that was a smart thing to do, to give up assets and then pay him, but really good defensive tackle, really good player to have next to a young player in Murphy there. You have Boye Mafe, who I really like. I think he had a really good year last year. And then not much outside of that in terms of edge rushers. But that's enough guys. When you have a top-flight linebacker, 3 really good corners, a good safety, a great defensive tackle, and a really young potential stud at defensive tackle, a new coordinator who's brought in as a defensive coordinator should be able to make that defense a top 5 defense. And if he makes the Seahawks defense a top 5 defense, they will make the playoffs. I just don't know. I'm not willing to say that he will be able to do that.
Yeah, they have the 15th easiest schedule, so right at league average. Their over-under is at 7.5. I've got the over on that. This is my final wild card team in the NFC. Okay. I have the Seattle Seahawks making the wild card. What's your record prediction for them?
I have them at 8-9. I think if I was power ranking my teams in terms of how I'm ranking them this year going into the year, I think they'd be 8th. So they're just missing the playoffs for me. I could really easily, if I watched a couple videos and got in on Mike Macdonald, I think as a coach, I think I could be swayed into them being my 7th team and the third wild card. It's been really tough for me to narrow down my 3rd wild card. They've been one of the options throughout the whole time. We're going to talk about my pick for the 3rd wild card coming up with our last team, though.
All right. Before we go to that last team, we've got a comment coming in from Charles, who's watching from the Bahamas. Longtime watchers and listeners of our shows know that if you tell me you're watching or listening from an international country, you will get a shout out on the podcast. So
always.
Thanks for joining the show, Charles. Really appreciate it. He predicts the Seahawks will be 9-8 as well. So great minds think alike. So he's right there with you, Mark.
We're all going over.
All right. Well, let's move on to our final team. It is the Arizona Cardinals. Who last season, in the first year with Jonathan Gannon as their head coach, went 4-13. This offseason, they lost Hollywood Brown, DJ Humphries, Rondell Moore, and unfortunately, a couple days ago, they lost BJ Ojulari to an ACL in practice. So he will be out for the season. Absolutely hate to see that, especially for a young guy trying to really break into the league. But this offseason, they added Evan Brown, Bilal Nichols, Justin Jones, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jonah Williams, And then in the draft, Marvin Harrison Jr., Darius Robinson, Max Melton, who I was a huge fan of, and Trey Benson. Big questions for me. Can Jonah Williams get his career back on track? If you just go look at PFF grades, his pass blocking has gotten worse every year of his career, and he has never justified the 11th overall selection that the Bengals spent on him through the first 4 years in the league. So he's a risky signing. It's big name, high pedigree. He's struggled to put it together at the NFL level. So can he, with a new team, does he just need a change of scenery? And then if he does, how good could this offense really be? I mean, you've got a healthy Kyler Murray. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr. You've got Trey McBride, who had a really good year last year. You've got Trey Benson, James Conner. Like, this offense could be a very fun offense to watch. They have the 16th easiest strength of schedule, so again, right around league average. Their over-under is at 6.5. Mark, what do you think about the Cardinals?
They are the team that I've talked myself into this season as my surprise team, and I have them at 9-8. I have them as my third wild card, the seventh playoff team. Yeah, I'm going in, and it's because of the offense. Shane knows just how high I am on Marvin Harrison Jr. I think there's a chance he steps into the league and he's a top 5 receiver this season. In terms of where I'm drafting him for fantasy, I'm drafting him as my number 7 wide receiver off the board, over guys like Puka Nacua, over guys like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Mike Evans. I think he's going to be that much of a difference maker year one, and the targets are going to be there for him. And I think Kyler Murray, I'd be more worried about Kyler coming off an injury if he didn't look exactly like Kyler Murray when he came back last year. He looked every bit of as explosive and elusive as he did in years past, if not even more so. I thought he looked incredible at the end of last season. I think James Conner has slowly become one of the most underrated running backs and players in the NFL in general. You look at what he did over the last 5 weeks of last season when Kyler Murray was playing quarterback with him. He had 514 yards, rushed for 5 yards per carry, had 5 touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. He was an absolute stud, and he was a top 5 running back in that stretch when Kyler Murray was out there playing with him. And even for the regular season as a whole, he rushed for 5 yards per carry. That was with terrible quarterback play, stacking the box against Josh Dobbs and guys like that, and he was still able to play like that. I think he's one of my favorite fantasy values this season. Marvin Harrison Jr. stud, like I said. Trey McBride it was a revelation last year, and obviously he was a guy a lot of draft nerds loved, but he was better than I think anyone could have expected in year one. He was the number 1 target in that offense. I actually like what I saw from Michael Wilson at times. I think he's going to slot in as a nice wide receiver too for them. And Paris Johnson Jr., I think is a bookend tackle for the next X amount of years. I just think Arizona is going to be a really, really tough out offensively. Now, the conversation starts with the defense, and there's not a ton of top-end talent to get excited about. They added a lot of names. They added a lot of professional football players. It's on Jonathan Gannon to make that defense the 22nd best defense in football. I think if you make them below average and not bad, and it's his second year, a lot of the guys are still there from last season. It's it kind of reminds me of a bad college football team. And it's Boston College returned 17 of 22 starters. And it's yeah, but they went 3-9. Were the returning starters any good? Are we happy that they're having continuity? But at least the Cardinals do have a lot of continuity from their team. They've been in the Gannon scheme, and we saw it in Philly. Obviously, a lot more top end talent, but year 1 to year 2 was a big difference with Gannon defensively. I think we saw once Gannon left how much that maybe we didn't appreciate Gannon when he was here. I think he is a good defensive coordinator, and even down the stretch at times last year, I thought their defense showed fight. I think that if he's just able to just get that defense to be below average instead of bad, I think we're talking about a playoff team, because I think their offense is that good.
Yeah, Joe Ciccoletti chimes in, says that look at what DeAndre Hopkins did, playing 16 games in 2020. Marvin Harrison Jr. could repeat that, and maybe even better if Kyler stays healthy. And I think that's what you bet a lot of the upside of this offense on, is Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in right away, being the player that we think he is, finding that immediate chemistry with Kyler Murray. And, I mean, let's just call a spade, being the best receiver that Kyler Murray's ever played football with. And I think that's That's where you see
Hopkins was really good in 2020, but it's neck and neck.
Yeah. So, all right. So you.
Sorry, I forgot to mention this with Kyler. We always love to talk about this, but mobile quarterbacks, they give you a floor. Last year, even coming out halfway through the year and playing his first football of the season, they went 3-5 in his starts with a bad team that's definitely gotten better. Obviously, we just talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. The 2022 was a rough season. I think that was the Cliff Kingsbury disaster class. But before that, 8-8 and then 9-5 as a starter the 2 years previously. I think if Kyler's healthy, I think they have like a 7-win floor. So I'm just saying I think they're going to be a 9-win team instead of a 7-win team, realistically.
All right. Well, I have the over 6.5. I do not have them making the playoffs, but I think they should clear that over-under pretty easily. So I'm not drinking the playoff Kool-Aid, but I do think the offense could be a lot of fun to watch, and I think they'll be a much improved football team this year.
Who comes in last, LA or Arizona, in your division predictions?
Ooh. I think I would have the Rams coming in last.
Me too. Clip that when they go 11-6 again this year and make us look stupid.
Yeah, no kidding. Mike says the new Call of Duty drops on November 25th or October 25th. Better stack those wins early for true. Kyler there. So
that's true. Well, college football's out. He's playing with Oklahoma like Shane is, winning national titles.
Absolutely. I did set all right in the universe the other day by winning my first national title with Oklahoma and road to the college football playoffs. So I had to post that out on Twitter and stuff just to let everybody know.
I've won back-to-back with Notre Dame. I'm in year 5 now, which is insane that I've played that much, but hopefully we will be able to win a third straight.
Yeah. Mine was in the online road to the college football playoff mode.
Yeah.
I'm doing a dynasty mode with a friend of mine where I'm Florida International and he's Florida Atlantic, and we're just starting year 3. So we won. We went to the conference championship and lost to Liberty in year 1, but we won a bowl game. And then in year 2, we lost a heartbreaker to Middle Tennessee State the last week of the regular season that kept us out of the conference title game. But we did win our bowl game again. So we're entering year 3 as a preseason number 25 team. So we'll see. We'll see if we can end a season ranked now. So, all right, that's going to about wrap it up. I mean, I guess college football talk was maybe my final thoughts. Do you have anything else, final thoughts, or we'll just leave it at video games today?
We'll leave it at video games.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for this episode of Chalk Talk. Thank you for joining us for episode 163 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications for the Eagles Pinpull Network so you don't miss the next episode that comes your way. Drop us a 5-star rating wherever you stream your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at ShaneHalfNFL. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr., and we will catch you guys next time.